Sonicstate here at Superbooth 2019. I'm here with Dave Smith. Absolutely thrilled to meet you. It's a real pleasure. Now, we're not going to actually talk about gear in this. We're going to actually talk about music.
What? What does that have to do with anything?
But I was kind of curious about when you first kind of got into music. Were you an avid music fan?
Well, if you go back far enough, I played piano when I was a kid, took piano lessons like everybody did. So I started on keyboards, I guess you'd say. First I have to say I was never, a super musician. It's always amateur only. And when the Beatles came out, I picked up a guitar like everybody else did and started playing guitar. In high school I'd be playing with bands a little bit. In college I actually played bass in a couple of bands.
I'm a bass player.
Yeah, bass players. So I was a guitar player and a bass player, and then keyboards a little bit. But so that was my musical background. And it wasn't until I'm trying to think what the year was. The first thing that really got my ear perked about synthesizer music was, of course, Wendy Carlos and Switched on Bach, like everybody else. There was just something magical there, because I did like classical music. And to hear something that exciting, there was something magical about the sound, the energy, everything. It was different, but it was still Bach.
It's hard to relate now because we've been so inundated with all sorts of music over the years. To hear something that sounded so like alien, I suppose, those tones, those textures.
But it was alien, but not.
Because of the Bach.
It was so musical. That's the key. It was all. She did such a great job of making it musical, and that's why it was such a hit. And that's it was just this whole new thing. As you know now, it's hard to be new or unique. Everything has some history or it's derivative of something. But this was fresh. It was just like, whoa.
So the actual sounds of synthesizers then, the sound of the synthesizer then, it caught your ear and you were drawn towards that then?
Definitely, yes.
Interesting. And then I guess following on from that, I suppose that's when the doors started opening and more synthesizers started coming into music. You were then kind of clued into that and tuned in, I suppose. What came next?
Well, I was sort of tuned into it, but not like you would have thought. It wasn't like I was, oh my God, I have to go out and look for synthesizers. It was really a random thing. A friend of mine said one day, hey, this little store has a synthesizer in it. And I go, oh, I've kind of heard about those. I should go check it out. And I went down. It was a small store, and they had a Mini Moog and an ARP Odyssey. And I had a technical background, of course. So I looked at these things and had a keyboard on it and all these knobs. And I said, I don't know what this is. I don't know how it works. I have to have one. And right there, I made the choice, Mini Moog or ARP Odyssey.
Oh, wow.
And
that was the only choice, I suppose.
It kind of was, yeah. And I got the Mini Moog. There was something about it that I thought was, first of all, it wasn't white. And second of all, it didn't have sliders. I hate sliders. So it was an easy choice, and it sounded really good. But, it took me a while to figure out how to use it and how to get sound out of it and what's an oscillator, what's a filter.
How long did it take before you actually unscrewed it and had a look inside?
I couldn't give it wasn't that long. I started building things and modifying it fairly quickly. But yeah, it wasn't, so again, I wasn't a synth nut. It just sort of was accidental, but once I saw it in person, I knew that was it, because it was music, it was electronics, it was technology. That was me.
Right, and because we were talking earlier a little bit, and I'm a complete prog rock nut, really. A 70s prog rock. Beyond that, not so much, but it was an interesting era for experimental music. Experimental music was very much in the mainstream. Was that something that was kind of something that you were following? Were you interested in that kind of music at all?
Quite a lot of it. Yes, Genesis, Peter Gabriel, all that stuff. Sure. That was. I can't say I was super deep into all of it, but I saw Yes play, I saw Genesis play, I saw a lot of those bands. And of course, when the Prophet 5 came out, out of the first 10, one went to Rick Wakeman, one went to David Bowie, one went to Joe Zawinul, and because actually the synth thing was happening a lot in the jazz side of things too. With Joe Zawinul, Weather Report, Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, all those guys were getting into synths, and because jazz was always supposed to be cutting edge sound-wise and musically and all that. So synths kind of fit in perfectly too. So the prog rock thing was kind of at the same time, maybe a little after the jazz guys. I think the jazz guys were doing it first, maybe, because they were doing it in the mid-'70s. Well, I guess the prog rock, that's mid-'70s too. What am I saying? So it's all about the same time.
Yeah.
So
what about the German music that was happening then? So like the early Tangerine Dream, and had that stuff made it across? Was that on your radar?
Not so much. I knew of both bands, but I can't say I had that much early memories of that back then. They eventually were using Prophet 5s, and eventually got to know them, but at first I don't remember too much. But that didn't have that much of a penetration, I don't think, overseas.
Because I'm sort of kind of curious about like how your influences had sort of led you to make the decisions that you did, that led you to the designs. I mean, obviously the polyphonic angle of it, that must have been something that was ticking around in your mind, and that had a huge impact then once it was actually released, wasn't it? In terms of it then influenced music because of the potential that it created. That must have been very gratifying to hear.
Oh, and it was awesome. And what was cool is how it wasn't just keyboard players who were buying them. I remember one time everybody in Talking Heads had a Prophet 5. It doesn't matter if you're the bass player or the drummer or the keyboard player or the guitar player. I mean, all of them had one. And we saw that happen a lot. And of course, all the composers were using them, and that's the cool thing about synths. But the Prophet 5, it really was the first thing that made it accessible to everybody. As we all know, in a MIDI Moog, if you don't have the knob set right, you won't get any sound out, right? And you can't just make up your own sounds quickly and easily and switch between them. So now all of a sudden there's a synth where you can instantly change your sound, and there are already a bunch of great sounds that you can start with, and it was easy to modify them. And of course it was polyphonic. So it just greatly spread out synthesis to the masses.
It was probably also partly responsible for kind of cutting down those huge racks of synths that people had, and they could use one instead of needing many. So if they were going from a verse to a chorus, instead of having to have a separate keyboard to go between them.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, they still had their stacks, but it got smaller. I mean, a lot of people would do the CP70 Prophet 5 or a DX7 Prophet 5. I mean, they would still have a couple. I mean, some people would still drag around Rhodes. And actually, once the DX7 came out, nobody used the Rhodes anymore. But there was an economic aspect to it also.
Okay, cool. So, can you recall any times where you heard something maybe on the radio or someone played it, and you heard sounds in that music that you just simply couldn't understand where they came from? Is there?
Oh, well, that's always happened, because you're never quite sure how sounds are made and by who, and that's the part I always like. It's like, oh, that's a cool sound. I wonder how they did that. So that's the fun part, and especially when you find out, oh wait, that's my instrument. You did that.
Right.
How did you do that?
That's cool.
That's the best part, because we of course have a certain idea, and you have an idea. You never know what it's going to sound like till you're done. I mean, we don't have that much control over it. The instrument does kind of have its own say in what it's going to sound like, but we come up with a bunch of sounds and put it out there. And it's always magical to have somebody just turn it upside down and do something really weird with it.
Things that you didn't even conceive of. And yeah, amazing, yeah. So it must be quite an enjoyable thing then with to get the name Sequential back onto these. I mean, obviously, I'm saying it's replacing your own name off it.
Well, I never liked the Dave Smith Instruments name. When I first started it was just me for 5 years. And I didn't really have a plan. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just wanted to build a couple hardware things just for fun. But the name was way too long. The logo was really stupid. It was just some font, a common font. So my email name was way too long and too hard to type in, especially on a phone. So that was part of it. The other part of it is, again, originally it was just me. But now we have a whole team. It's 14 of us, and every product we do, everybody gets involved in. So it's not just me, so it's unfair to just keep using my name when It's a team effort now. And the third part was it just historically seemed like the right thing to do, because I started Sequential Circuits in 1974, and here it is, 40 years later, and it just seemed 45 years later.
Yeah.
Wow. It just seemed like the right thing to do, to just kind of bring it all back together again. And it's a much shorter day.
Nice. So seeing the name Sequential, then it does feel more evocative of the, maybe of like the late 70s and the early 80s or whatever. So now it's on these lovely new instruments. What about the new music then that's coming out? Anything floating your boat?
Well, yeah, it's almost like before. The synths are showing up everywhere. Our customer range from people you would expect, like Nine Inch Nails, Radiohead, all those people. But we also have Alicia Keys or the Black Keys, or Taylor Swift was playing one of our keyboards in concert. So for me, people ask me, well, who's your favorite artist? And it's always hard to answer without pissing people off. But for me, live music is what I like to hear. I don't listen to quite as much recorded music anymore, but I just love to go out and hear concerts. And I'm lucky because a lot of people, when they come into town, will call us up and invite us to shows. So like last weekend, we saw Hot Chip play in a small club in San Francisco. And of course, on stage, they had a Prophet X and a Prophet 6 and a Prophet 12 and a Tetra and a Tempest.
Wow.
So it's kind of like a good commercial for us either way. But the music was awesome. I mean, it was just great to be there. Radiohead's always been my favorite group if I had to actually pick one, for obvious reasons. And, our keyboards on and off have been prominent, everything in its right place. It's Prophet 5 right there in your face. It's just
amazing track.
And with a band like that, when you hear your products being used, it's just magical. But there's so many times I'll go see a band. A lot of times I'm not familiar with their music, so it's fun to go see what they're doing. And I'll be listening to it and I'll go, wow, this is really awesome. I probably wouldn't listen to it at home, but being here right now, it's just awesome to hear live music. Especially if they have a drummer. You have to have a drummer. I make a big thing about that because so many bands these days don't have drummers. And I can understand it, the economics of touring, if you're a small group, not so easy. A lot of people want to just have a laptop and a couple small keyboards, and it still sounds good, but there's something about the energy of having a real drummer on stage. I just saw a band here that first time I've seen them live, actually, called Paris Monster.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, so you know them?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So
he's using a mofo, I think.
He uses the drummer uses a mofo, so he's singing and playing drums often with one hand and one foot, and then playing bass with his right hand on a mofo.
He's so
and
funky.
And the other guy is playing. Jeff is playing a bass. Though a lot of times it sounds like a guitar, and he's got a modular system and a big floorboard, of course. And so two guys are doing all of this stuff, but the big part of it is having the drums there.
Yeah.
Because when he's not singing or playing the bass, then he'll actually use two hands to play the drums. So seeing things like that to me are just awesome.
Yeah, there has been a real resurgence, hasn't there, of with bands like Snarky Puppy and Wolfpack, and with real players and really, and that's really nice to see. And I guess it's great because your instruments have been focused on players, haven't they? Very much about
say it that way. Yeah. The other really cool thing that's happening these days a lot is these kids are coming out of Berklee School of Music, and traditionally, they all have chops, they're all good players and all that. But all the kids coming out now know all of the technology also. And it's really scary when you get kids who can play and know the technology. And a lot of them are getting jobs right away, and they're touring, they're producing, they're playing in bands. That's something that I don't think is on most people's radars, but it's really fun to see that happen. And it's fun to see where that's going to lead to in the next few years.
Yeah, and I'm sure your instruments will feature very kind of prominently with them.
Well, they seem to like them.
Excellent.
Some of the time.
Amazing. Well, Dave, I think we'll call it there. Thank you ever so much for talking to us. And,
thank you.
Yeah,
that was great.
Thank you. Yeah.